Welcome to today's deep dive. We're unpacking a document today that goes by a very academic, almost completely dry sounding title.
Yeah, it's quite the mouthful.
Right. It is called the Philanthropic Catalyst, Foundations as Systems Architects.
Yeah.
But, do not let that title fool you,
No, absolutely not.
because what we're actually looking at here is a highly critical, really meticulously detailed blueprint of how local civic power might actually operate, and often right under our noses.
Yeah, that's the fascinating part.
It is. The text claims to expose what it calls a closed-loop system.
Right.
This is where private wealth, specifically in the form of large tax-exempt philanthropic foundations, is effectively dictating public policy. And they do it all under the incredibly benign banner of strategic grant-making.
Yeah, before we really get into the mechanics of this, I think we need to establish some clear ground rules for our deep dive today.
Oh, definitely. Good idea.
Because this text presents a very sharp, very pointed critique of how immense private wealth and public policy intersect.
It really does.
It uses strong language and makes some incredibly provocative claims about the true nature of modern philanthropy and urban development. So we want to be exceptionally clear with you listening right now. We are not taking sides here.
No, not at all.
And we are not endorsing the viewpoints or the conclusions presented in this document. Our role is strictly to act as your guides.
Exactly.
We are just here to impartially break down the author's complex systems analysis. That way you can understand the arguments being made and sort of examine the machinery of this theory for yourself.
Right. That is the mission today. We are taking the schematic, we're laying it out on the table, and just looking at how the parts supposedly fit together.
Yeah, seeing what makes it tick.
Which really leads us to the big question that's going to guide our journey today. How exactly do charitable foundations function like venture capitalists, and what happens when they start designing our neighborhoods?
It's a huge question. And to answer that, we have to start by looking at the actual anatomy of this so-called closed loop.
Right, let's break down the parts.
So the author uses a really helpful mechanical analogy to explain how a city's infrastructure is divided up in this model. They break it down into the engine and the fuel.
Okay, engine and fuel.
Yeah. The local port authority is identified as the engine. Now, for anyone unfamiliar, a port authority is generally a quasi-governmental body. They handle large-scale infrastructure.
Things like transportation hubs, right? Or maritime ports.
Exactly. Maritime ports, regional development, that sort of thing. They have immense legal power to issue bonds, manage these massive budgets, and really navigate municipal law. They are the legal conduits.
The heavy machinery.
Right. But an engine, no matter how powerful it is basically useless without fuel and a destination.
And according to the text, the regional foundations provide both of those things.
They do.
They act as the financial fuel, putting in the money, and they provide the actual blueprint for where the vehicle is going.
Exactly.
But there's a third piece to this anatomy that really makes the whole thing hum, and that is the local university. The source claims the university's role is to provide, quote, intellectual cover. Which makes sense, because if a foundation just rolled into a city council meeting and demanded an entire neighborhood be redeveloped according to their own private vision,
people would absolutely ask questions.
they'd be outraged, right? But if the local university produces this comprehensive 300-page data-driven study recommending that exact same redevelopment plan,
suddenly it looks totally different.
right, it suddenly looks like an objective, scientifically backed civic improvement project.
Yeah, the university provides the academic justification. That is what makes the foundation's blueprint politically palatable. It legitimizes the direction that the engine is pointing.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because there is a phrase in the text that is incredibly sticky. I love this phrasing. It calls these foundations the venture capitalists of the public sector.
Yes, that's a brilliant term.
Now, when we hear venture capitalists, we usually think of Silicon Valley.
Right, tech bros.
Exactly. We think of investors pouring millions of dollars into a tech startup, giving them what is known as patient capital.
And patient capital is key here. That is money that doesn't demand an immediate return on investment.
Right. The startup is just allowed to burn through cash to build its architecture, acquire users, and eventually dominate a market.
And a parallel the author draws there is very intentional, because instead of a tech startup operating out of some garage, the foundation is providing that patient capital to stand up specific nonprofit organizations.
NPOs.
Right, NPOs. And the text actually leans on a specific regional example to really ground this theory, which is the Mahoning Valley.
Yeah, let's talk about the Mahoning Valley.
The claim here is that foundations in this region do not just act as passive donors. They aren't just writing checks to existing local charities.
Which is what you'd normally assume a foundation does.
Right. Instead, they actively seed and incubate entirely new NPOs from scratch. And they do this to serve a very specific structural function within this closed loop.
And the ultimate goal of these incubated nonprofits is what the author provocatively calls neighborhood extraction.
Which is a heavy term.
It is, because they aren't being stood up to run a local food pantry or an after-school program. They're being built specifically to acquire, hold, and manage real estate.
Which brings us to the actual playbook these entities use to establish control over local development. The text outlines a really clear two-step strategy. They call it seed and shield.
Seed and shield. Okay, let's break that down. The first phase, the seed, is all about initial access and capital advantage, right?
Look, exactly.
So in this seed phase, these large foundations provide multi-million-dollar startup capital to launch an NPO. The text uses a placeholder name for one of these hypothetical organizations, calling it the CXYZ.
Right, just as an example.
But the crucial tactic here is that they do not launch the CXYZ in isolation. They launch it in partnership with the city itself.
That's the magic word, partnership.
By framing the launch as a municipal partnership, this brand new, privately funded NPO gets immediate VIP access to things the general public could only dream of.
Oh yeah, they get the golden ticket.
They get direct access to municipal data, internal city planning documents, and really just the political corridors of power.
They essentially get the keys to the city because they're wearing a philanthropic name tag. That municipal partnership completely validates their existence. It gives them a massive competitive edge over literally any private developer.
It's a huge advantage.
But the real ingenuity of this system, at
Yeah.
least according to this critique, kicks in during step 2, which is the shield.
Right, the shield. This is where the real estate reality actually hits the road. Let's look at the specific example provided in the text for this. Imagine one of these newly seeded NPOs buys up residential property in a specific neighborhood.
Okay.
They then renovate it, and they start charging market rate rent. The text specifies a scenario where they start charging $1,250 for rent in a market where the historical norm was basically $650.
Wow. I mean, that is a near doubling of the cost of living in that specific footprint.
Right. If a traditional for-profit corporate developer came into a working-class town and practically doubled the rent overnight, the reaction would be explosive.
Oh, there would be protests at City Hall the next day.
Exactly. They would be universally branded as predatory landlords gentrifying the neighborhood and displacing longtime residents.
That is exactly what would happen to a private developer.
Yeah.
But here is the mechanism of the shield. Because this MPO was funded and incubated by a charitable foundation, its activities are totally protected.
It has a different vibe.
Right. The foundation's brand provides this moral halo, and this halo actively discourages public dissent. I mean, after all, how can you protest a charity that claims its entire mission is to revitalize the community?
Imagine seeing a massive new residential development pop up on your own street. You notice the rents are shockingly high, and the people who used to live there are being priced out.
It happens all the time.
But when you look at the sign out front, it is not a cutthroat investment firm. It is a quote-unquote community revitalization initiative backed by a beloved historic local foundation.
It completely changes the narrative.
You might wonder how they managed to bypass all the standard community scrutiny, the rowdy town halls, the contentious zoning fights that usually accompany massive developments. This text argues that the moral shield of charity is exactly how they bypass it.
Furthermore, that moral halo effectively blocks any council-level investigations, too.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Because local politicians are incredibly reluctant to investigate a philanthropic organization. Politicians want to be photographed cutting ribbons alongside charitable foundations.
Okay.
They absolutely do not want to be seen interrogating the executives of a nonprofit that is ostensibly just there to help.
That makes total sense.
So the shield protects the organization from both public outrage and political oversight simultaneously.
Wow. Okay, so if they have the patient capital, the municipal access, and this impenetrable moral shield, how do they actually execute taking over a city block so smoothly? Here is where it gets really interesting.
Yes.
We have to look at what the author calls interlocking directorates, or the human loop.
The human loop.
Mm-hmm.
This is the core of the systems analysis portion of the document, looking again at the Mahoning Valley. The text reveals that the closed loop is most effective simply because of who is sitting in the boardroom.
Right, it always comes down to the people.
Always. If you look closely at the organizational charts, you will find that the exact same individuals sit on the boards of four seemingly distinct, separate entities.
It sounds a bit like playing a game of Monopoly, where one person gets to be the banker, the property owner, and the person rolling the dice for everyone else.
That is a very accurate way to put it.
Let's break down these four pillars of power. Entity number one is the foundation. They hold the massive capital. Entity number two is the university. They produce the crucial data, the studies, and the academic justification we talked about.
Yep.
Entity number three is the regional chamber. They handle the business lobbying, ensuring the local commercial environment is primed and political favors are perfectly aligned.
Okay.
And entity number four is the NPO itself. They are the boots on the ground actually executing the land acquisition and managing the properties.
And the author points out the jarring consequence of this exact setup. For these board members, there is absolutely zero conflict of interest.
Zero.
Why? Because all four of these entities, despite having totally different names, different buildings, and completely different public missions, are actually working toward the exact same private investment goal.
So picture a single meeting of these individuals. They can conceptually put on their foundation hats to approve the multi-million-dollar funding.
Nice.
Then they switch to their university hats to commission the neighborhood impact study that justifies the spend. Then they swap to their Chamber of Commerce hats to lobby the mayor to support the initiative. It's brilliant.
And finally, they put on their NPO hats to go out and buy the land. Information, strategies, and resources just flow seamlessly between these organizations because the same 5 or 6 people are just moving from one boardroom to the next.
Yeah, and while the insiders experience this totally seamless, friction-free environment, the experience is entirely different for the public.
Oh, completely.
And this raises a massive question about civic engagement, because the general public is forced to navigate these entities as distinct, frustrating, bureaucratic silos.
Right, because we don't know they're connected.
Exactly. If you, as a resident, have a grievance about a new development blocking your sunlight or changing your street's traffic pattern, you go to the NPO.
Naturally.
But the NPO just points you to the university's data to prove it's a net positive. So you go to the university, and they point you to the chamber's regional economic plan.
Which is incredibly frustrating. You go to the chamber, and they point you to the foundation's grant parameters. It is an administrative labyrinth completely designed to exhaust the public. Meanwhile, the people actually in charge simply take an elevator to a different floor.
It is an incredibly sophisticated closed system. And when you look at the financial mechanics described in the source, it becomes clear that this isn't just about administrative control. It is a massive wealth generation engine.
Oh, undeniably.
The text explains that this closed loop allows foundations to act almost exactly like a private equity fund. Let's pause on private equity for a second. Normally, a private equity firm pools money from wealthy investors to buy companies or real estate, restructure them to increase their value, and then eventually sell them for a massive profit.
Right.
And crucially, they pay taxes on those gains.
But in the closed loop, they rely on a concept the text calls capital preservation. Here is how the loop functions financially. The tax-exempt foundations invest their capital into these property-holding NPOs.
The CXYZs.
Right. Those NPOs then go out and accumulate real estate assets. They essentially hoard property. And over time, as we saw with the rent jumping from $650 to $1,250, those properties appreciate in value and the rental income rises significantly.
And because it is all happening under the legal umbrella of tax-exempt nonprofits, all of that newly generated equity stays securely trapped within the loop.
It never leaves.
It doesn't bleed out into taxes. It just endlessly compounds. It grows the institutional power, the wealth, and the reach of the foundation and its various subsidiaries. It is essentially a tax-free accumulation machine.
It really is. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the ultimate consequence of this financial and structural machinery is profoundly undemocratic.
Yeah, that's the scary part.
The text argues that the primary outcome of the closed loop is bypassing the ballot box entirely.
We hear the term public-private partnership all the time in local news. It is almost universally presented as a collaborative, positive thing, right? The city and private charities teaming up to fix a problem.
Yeah, it always sounds great on paper. But according to this analysis, funding these public-private partnerships is actually just a mechanism for moving power.
Shifting the control.
Exactly. The real, tangible decision-making power regarding how a neighborhood is developed, who gets to live there, what businesses are allowed to open, and what the economic landscape looks like, is quietly and systematically moved out of City Hall.
And City Hall, for all its flaws, endless debates, and general inefficiencies, is where you, the voter, actually have a voice.
You have a say.
You can vote out a mayor if you don't like their zoning policies. You can petition a city council member or speak at a public forum.
But this system moves that power securely into foundation boardrooms. You, the public, have absolutely no say in who sits on the board of a private philanthropic foundation.
None at all.
You cannot vote them out. You cannot demand to see their internal emails. The democratic process is neatly bypassed by private capital disguised as charity.
So we have spent a lot of time talking about the architects, the foundations designing the blueprints, funding the seeds, and shielding the operations. But blueprints do not build themselves.
No, they don't.
To really understand how this happens on the physical ground, the source text shifts our focus to the operators. This is what the author terms the technocratic layer.
The technocratic layer. Because the architects can have all the vision and money in the world, but these technocrats are the gears of the system.
The gears.
They are the local offices, the appointed boards, and the officials that actually turn a theoretical plan into a binding legal reality. The text specifically calls out 3 critical gears in this machine: land banks, zoning boards, and the judiciary.
Let's clarify how these gears usually work in a typical city, just for context. A land bank is essentially a quasi-governmental entity that takes over vacant, abandoned, or tax-delinquent properties to repurpose them.
Right. In theory, it's for community good.
Zoning boards dictate what you are legally allowed to build on a piece of land, whether it can be a towering apartment complex or just a single-family home. And the judiciary, the local courts, handle the inevitable legal challenges, property disputes, or evictions.
Normal civic functions.
Exactly. In a normal system, these are massive points of friction. They are checks and balances meant to slow down aggressive development and protect the public interest.
But by deeply involving these technocrats in the network, perhaps through those interlocking directorates or those strategic municipal partnerships we discussed during this seed phase, the closed loop ensures a completely different outcome.
It totally changes the game.
The author argues that the system ensures every single potential point of friction is immediately smoothed out by a well-placed insider.
Imagine a local bakery wanting to buy a vacant lot next door to expand. They might spend a year fighting with the land bank, filing paperwork, and attending zoning hearings, only to be denied.
It happens every day.
But when the incubated NPO wants that same lot, the gear turns and the deed is transferred. Need a zoning variance that would normally require 5 contentious public hearings. The gear turns, and it's quietly approved. The machinery of compliance is fully lubricated by the influence of the loop.
It creates a totally bifurcated reality. The legal and bureaucratic hurdles that would stop an ordinary citizen or a small business dead in their tracks simply do not exist for the entities operating within the closed loop.
It's 2 different rule books.
Exactly. The system protects itself and its investments at every single level of local governance, from the massive foundation boardroom down to the local zoning permit office.
It is a sweeping, comprehensive breakdown of systemic power. Let's take a breath and briefly recap the sheer scale of the journey we've just been on together today.
It's been a lot to cover.
It has. We started at the very top, looking at how private, tax-exempt foundations act as the venture capitalists of the public sector. They provide the patient capital and the master blueprints for urban development.
And we examine their seed and shield tactics. Launching NPOs with millions of dollars to gain VIP municipal access, and then using the moral halo of charity to shield themselves from public outcry and political investigation when they, drastically raise the rent.
We explored the human loop, how the exact same individuals sit in the boardrooms of the foundations, the universities, the chambers of commerce, and the NPOs.
The hat switching.
Right. This creates a seamless flow of private power for the insiders, while leaving the public lost in a maze of bureaucratic silos. We looked at how this operates as a tax-exempt equity fund, endlessly hoarding real estate, compounding wealth, and moving real decision-making power out of City Hall, completely bypassing the ballot box.
And finally, we looked at the technocratic layer, the gears of the land banks and zoning boards that smooth out any friction, ensuring the architect's vision becomes a legal reality without any democratic interference. It is a profound rethinking of what modern philanthropy can look like when applied to urban development.
It really changes how you read the local news.
It fundamentally alters your perspective. And I want to leave you with a final lingering thought to explore on your own that builds precisely on the source material we've discussed today.
I love these.
The next time you open your local paper or scroll through your news feed, you see a glowing headline about a multi-million-dollar public-private partnership that is promising to revitalize a downtown area or bring equitable development to a struggling neighborhood. Take 10 minutes and look up the names.
Just do a little digging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look up who actually sits on the board of the philanthropic charity providing the funds. Then look up the board of a local university providing the economic impact study. Then look at the development company executing the build.
See if the names match.
Exactly. Ask yourself, are you looking at a genuine, broad-based community effort? Or are you just looking at the exact same 5 people wearing different hats, successfully executing a flawless, closed loop right in your own backyard?
Once you see the matrix, you really can't unsee it. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It has been an intense and incredibly eye-opening exploration into the mechanics of local power. Keep questioning the world around you, keep looking past the headlines, and take care of yourselves out there.